I welcome members to this virtual meeting of the Legislation, Justice and Constitution Committee. In accordance with Standing Order 34.19, I've determined that the public are excluded from the meeting in order to protect public health. In accordance with Standing Order 34.21, notice of this decision was included in the published agenda for this meeting. The meeting is being broadcast live on Senate TV, and the record of proceedings will be published as usual. Aside from the procedural adaptation for conducting proceedings remotely, all other standing order requirements remain in place. We have a full committee attendance today. The usual housekeeping rules will apply. Are there any declarations of interest? I don't see any declarations of interest, so we move straight on to item 2 of the agenda, and we start with the allocation of housing and homelessness eligibility Wales Amendment Regulations of 2021. This instrument amends the allocation of housing and homeless eligibility Wales Regulations of 2014, which provide for certain categories of persons from abroad to be eligible or ineligible for an allocation of housing accommodation and or for housing assistance. The amendments extend eligibility for housing and housing assistance provided by local authorities in Wales to stateless persons. There aren't any merits or technical points have been identified. I think that's right, Gareth. Yep. So any observations or comments from members? Okay, so we note that and we move on then to item 2.2, the Official Statistics Wales Amendment Order of 2021, and the purpose of this order is to amend the schedule to the Official Statistics Wales Order of 2017 to provide that statistics produced or to be produced by Digital Health and Care Wales are official statistics for the purpose of Part 1 of the Statistics and Registration Service Act of 2007. Again, I don't think there are any technical or merits points identified. Any comments or observations from members? No, so we move straight on then to item 3. We move on to the Education Student Loans Repayment Amendment Regulations of 2021, and members have before them the report, the regulations, the explanatory memorandum. This instrument amends the Education Student Loans Repayment Regulations of 2009, which govern the repayment of income contingent student loans in England and Wales. The changes are consequential to changes made for repayment thresholds for students in Scotland, and the regulations have been made on a composite basis. Over to the lawyers. I think there's a merit point been identified. Gareth?
There is just one point which notes that the regulations are in English only, as they are made by both the Welsh Ministers and the Secretary of State, and they've been made for both the Senedd and the UK Parliament.
Okay, are there any comments or observations? If there aren't any, then we move straight on to item 3.2, which is the Local Government and Elections Wales Act of 2021, Consequential Amendments and Miscellaneous Provisions Regulations of 2021. These are regulations which make amendments which are consequential on amendments made by Schedule 4 to the Local Government and Election Wales Act of 2021 to provisions in Part 5A of the Local Government Act of 1972, or give effect to provisions of Section 47 of the 2021 Act relating to remote attendance. The regulations do also make provision relating to the length of time certain local authority documents are required to be electronically accessible under the Local Authorities Coronavirus Meetings Wales Regulations of 2020. And these are regulations which we will be debating in plenary tomorrow. Over to the lawyers.
There is one technical point which probes to what extent these regulations are retrospective. The Welsh Government response was received on Friday and does not agree that the regulations have retrospective effect. And I agree with the Welsh Government. There are no concerns around retrospectivity here. The regulations do not retrospectively change the law before the date the regulations come into force. And there is one merits point which notes there's been no formal consultation, and the government explains this is because the regulations made consequential amendments only.
Thank you. We note those comments, particularly the important points with regard to retrospectivity. Any comments or observations from members? Don't see any, so we move on to item 3.3. The Education Workforce Council interim suspension orders, additional functions, Wales Order 2021. Members have again the report and regulations and the explanatory memorandum. Now, as part of its role as regulator, the Education Workforce Council is required to maintain a register of all the provisions registered with the Council. The Education Act of 2014, that is the Wales Act, requires the Council to carry out investigation where it is alleged that a registered person is guilty of unacceptable professional conduct, professional incompetence, or it is alleged the person has been convicted of a relevant offence. This order adds to the Council's functions, so the Council may, by way of an interim suspension order, suspend a registered person from the public register prior to the outcome of an investigation and disciplinary hearing. This is an order which is also to be debated in plenary tomorrow. There is a merits point identified, Gareth?
Yes, that merits point highlights the potential for the Education Workforce Council having to meet at very short notice to consider certain applications. And an example is provided in the draft report where the Council could have to convene within 1 day in order to decide a particular type of application. The government has been asked to respond.
Okay, any comments or observations? I don't see any, so we move on to item 3.4, which is the Agricultural Support Miscellaneous Amendments Wales EU Exit Regulations of 2021. These are regulations proposed to make amendments to retained EU law and domestic law to put in place a domestic framework to fund new rural development schemes in Wales. The set of lawyers have, with their normal detailed work, identified a large number of points for reporting. So on Friday, the Welsh Government withdrew these regulations and relayed a revised version, which will be considered at our next meeting. Is there anything you need to add to that, Gareth?
Only to note that the government still responded to these. The government response received on Friday, and they accepted all of the errors raised in the original draft report.
Well, it shows the importance of that detailed scrutiny. So thank you for that. Are there any other comments or observations from members? I don't see any, so we move on then to item 3.5. The Land Transaction Tax temporary variations of rates and bans for residential property transactions, Wales Amendment Regulations of 2021. Members have before them all the relevant papers, including the letter from the Minister for Finance and Trefnydd of the 3rd of March 2021. These regulations amend the 2020 regulations of the same name to specify an extension to the current temporary variation to the land transaction tax rates and bans that will apply to purchases of certain residential property transactions. Plenary debate again is scheduled for the 23rd of March, and merit point has been identified. Gareth?
There are 2 merits points. The first simply notes that these regulations are intended to provide additional support to taxpayers who are buying their homes. And the second notes that land transaction tax is paid into the Welsh Consolidated Fund.
Okay, thank you. That is any comments or observations? If not, then we move on to item 4.1, which is the Corporate Joint Committee's amendment of Schedule 6 to the Welsh Language Wales Measure 2011 Regulations of 2021. Again, members have the report and the Welsh Government response. These are regulations which we considered on the 8th of March. Our report was laid again on the 8th of March, the same day. Members are now invited to note the Welsh Government response which has been received. Are there any comments or observations on that? Okay, thank you for that. On to item 5. The greenhouse gas emissions, the Kyoto Protocol Registry Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2021. And again, we have before us a written statement and the relevant commentary. The written statement gives notification that the Welsh Government has consented to the making of these regulations, and it notes that consent has been given for reasons of efficiency and expediency. The statement also notes that the regulations amend the Environment Act of 1995 as it applies to charging authorities. The Natural Resources Body for Wales is a charging authority. Members may wish to seek clarification on this as to why a statutory instrument consent memorandum has not been laid before the Senedd insofar as the regulations amend the Environment Act 1995. So I propose that we do that. Members agreed with that? Does anyone want to add to that? Is there anything you want to add to it, Gareth? No? So we'll make note of that and we'll pursue that particular point. Item 6, we have a number of papers to note, which we can, I suggest we discuss in private session, but we have the letter from the Kennel Club, the animal welfare licensing of activities involving animals, Wales Regulations 2021. We, in the letter raises concerns about the animal welfare licensing of activities involving animals, regs of 2021, which we'll be considering at next week's meeting. So I suggest, David.
Yeah, I think it's worth putting on the public record the contents of the letter from the Kennel Club relate to substantially a lack of consultation, which occurred in 2019 as well as 2020, and we understand the difficulties of consulting during COVID. But we have said that the major stakeholders are clearly identifiable, should still be consulted wherever possible, and I think this underlines that that call we've consistently made.
I think that's a very good point, and we will be considering this at our next meeting. So we'll obviously raise issues relating to that then, but that is on the record now. Is there anyone else who wanted to add anything to that point? That's been well identified, I think, and is consistent with the comments this committee has made with regard to capacity for consultation. Okay, we'll move on then. David, thank you for that. Item 6.2, we have the letter from the Minister for Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs, committee report on the Welsh Government's supplementary legislative consent memorandum on the Environment Bill. So there's a letter to note. It's a letter which responds to our report on the Welsh Government's LCM on the Environment Bill. Can I suggest we defer any discussion on that to a private session? Thank you. And we move on to item 6.3, which is a letter from the Minister for the Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs regarding the official controls temporary measure COVID-19 amendment regulations and the organic amendment regulations 2021. We have the letter of the 12th of March 21 to note regarding the Welsh ministerial consent to the UK government legislating on behalf of Wales. I suggest we defer any discussion of that to private session. Thank you. Move on, and then we're down ready to move into private sessions. So in accordance with Standing Order 17.426 and 9, I invite the committee to resolve to exclude the public from the remainder of the meeting. Members agree we move into private session? Thank you very much. So we now move into private session.